On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Zak Allen. He's the VP of Engineering at Shogun. We're going to be covering particular area around retention and understanding, how your team is happy. We're going to be asking Zak about, how he's doing that during the pandemic, because obviously things are a little bit different, and kind of curious to see what the previous process was, how it might have changed, and understanding how and when people might be looking to leave, right? Things are different, and we can't see everyone every day, and curious to see what his thoughts are. Zak, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. Quick background on myself. So VP of Engineering at Shogun, and Shogun is in the home improvement financial technology sector. So we have a software platform that basically empowers small business contractors to do a lot of different things on the financial tool set. So we have a financing product, which allows them to offer their projects in monthly payment plans. We have a payments product that's almost like a Venmo times two that allows them to send invoices and collect payments. And kind of looking towards the future, we're looking to add more and more tools to small business contractors. So that's Shogun.
Awesome. It sounds like a pretty exciting place to be right now. I kind of had a brief overview of what we're going to be talking about. And I think what's always great to understand is what the before was, right? So, and I know we're going to talk about really trust retention, trying to identify, detecting when people are looking to leave. And obviously, what I'd like to kind of start with is, how did things look for you, pre-pandemic, right? In the office, have all the typical processes set up and kind of start from there.
Yeah, so we're a small company. We just hit the 100-person mark, and pre-pandemic, we were in our offices split across San Francisco and Austin, Texas. And so, that entailed coming into the office every day within San Francisco, brainstorming, ideating, a lot of in-person kind of conversations and brainstorming. And, I was one of the first people on board at Shogun. And, what that entailed is, building a company, you need to ideate, you need to do a lot of brainstorming in person. And so a lot of different looking at ways to grow, looking at different products to build, whiteboarding, things like that. A lot of that happened in person pre-pandemic. So yeah, that's kind of what pre-pandemic looked like.
Interesting. I guess what's just been shifting, right, for everyone. I mean, it's not unique anymore. I think before, when they had remote employees, it was either you had a plan to how to have a couple people remote, or you just were basically like, well, this person wants to be remote, we're going to make an exception. And you kind of just dealt with it. And I think you saw a lot of engineers would always, or just a lot of people go, are they friendly towards remote? Because they're really asking, am I going to be singled out? Am I going to be by myself? How are they going to be able to review me and judge me? And I think the one thing that would be really interesting from that standpoint is, how do you know your team's happy, right? Like before, you guys were a small group and you could, see everyone, know everyone. You guys had a lot of camaraderie. You can tell if somebody's happy, right? But now, fast forward, you've been all doing this for a year. What signals, what do you look for to kind of determine, people on your team, if they're happy, things are going well?
Yeah, definitely. I would say the key thing to look at here is, I think one-on-ones are really sacred, and those should not be dismissed. I think it's pretty commonplace to just, set up maybe like a weekly, bi-weekly one-on-one, just get general thoughts. And, in the office, that meant walking to a meeting room, actually seeing them in person. But I think really trying to emphasize the one-on-one in the remote context, and really, take the full 30 minutes, take the full 45 minutes, and start to have like a real conversation with that person is really the key insight into how they are performing, how they're feeling remotely. I think, you can kind of pick up on signals in the office, how much they smile if they're in the other corner of the office, various things like that that just don't translate to remote. And so really trying to dive in there in the one-on-one is super important. And so, what does that look like? I think, usually in my one-on-ones, I ask what's going well, what's not going well. And, the engineer usually kind of gives a few answers in each of those categories. And I usually follow up with, how are you doing? And follow up that even more with, how are you really doing? And so usually, even if you ask the question twice, you'll learn a lot about, both personally as well as professionally, how they're feeling, how they're doing, how they're adjusting to working from home. Is their apartment situation conducive to actually being able to work productively? A lot of these things that, might not come out in the initial what's going well, what's not going well. I think those are key, and really taking notes of those over the course of time really gives you some insight into how a person is feeling.
Interesting. And I guess just a question. You mentioned taking notes. I'm actually going to focus on that for a second. Like when it comes to actually tracking this now, like before in the office, there'd be a lot of ad hoc, water cooler moments, just seeing somebody in the hallway, quick chat. Now it's more conscious. Are you finding yourself taking more notes, like actually trying to capture this all? I'm not sure what system you guys do to capture it or if it's just, you personally capturing it, but are you seeing that you're making a conscious effort to keep track of these? Because obviously, when you set up the 30 minutes, you might not have another touch point till, the next day on Zoom or something.
Yeah, definitely. I will say personally, I am taking a lot more notes. I think when I was in person, that meant actually like jotting it down with a pen and paper in a notebook. And I actually think as I am taking more notes, I need those notes to be searchable. I need those to be categorized somehow. So, I think there's tons of different systems to do this. I think even if you reach a certain scale, there could be like, I think there's software that has like employee profiles and things like that you can start to track, on a scale of 1 to 10, how satisfied this employee and track it over time. I don't think we're at that scale yet. And so kind of what I use is I basically just use Apple Notes, take notes throughout the different meetings. Usually if there's action items or things I want to follow up on, I use the app Things to basically like track that out ahead of time. And so usually when I write those down, I can always reference them back, see how from one-on-one to the next, how people are progressing and start to kind of build those profiles.
Interesting. Yeah. And I think what's becoming, the searchability of those additional, that 30 minutes has become, I guess, just more valuable. And I text a lot of engineering managers and like, yes, I've got to look back on that. I got to reflect because I might not have the opportunity that obviously you had in the office. And I guess as you're capturing these and, the one-on-ones are building, and I think it seems like it's core to what you do. Have you noticed any adjustment in how you're structuring your one-on-ones? Are they pretty much the same? Have you noticed like you're starting to, are they morphing, adjusting to being remote?
Yeah, definitely. So pre-pandemic, I really liked to do the walking one-on-one. So on the calendar, I would have 30 minutes booked. I would basically say, hey, let's get a cup of coffee. Let's, walk around. It's a bit more casual. Obviously, we're not in the office in the first place to go do that. But I think the walking around basically kind of filled the 30 minutes. So whether it was, really in-depth conversation about how someone's doing, or, if we only had 10 minutes of things to talk about, on a tactical level, you still have that 30 to bring up any overall issues or things like that. And so my main goal was to try to translate that. And I never treat one-on-ones as like an agenda where I try to breeze through it as quickly as possible to be as efficient as I can and, save you 20 minutes back to your day. I think I've only ever gone short on a one-on-one, maybe a handful of times. And so I think without the walk, I think there's just a couple more like different topics that we go over. I think the biggest area that I've expanded from before is the feedback section. So I usually end out with this in my one-on-ones where it's one piece of positive feedback and then another piece of constructive feedback. And so we have a very good feedback culture within Shogun where we're actively trying to better each other, actively giving each other constructive feedback. And it's not, negative where it's, hey, you should have done better here, but it's more so offering the feedback as well as potential solutions to that feedback. So I'd say in a given 30-minute one-on-one, we spend, maybe 5-10 minutes just on that topic itself.
Interesting. I like the way the feedback is done because obviously, it's just even more critical now to, use that time to provide, but positive things that you could work on. I'm a big believer, it's either, you're always trying to learn and succeed and do better, right? There's no real failing. But I think the way you've structured it probably gives a little bit more freedom in that sense with one-on-one. And you mentioned feedback loop. I'm just curious, like when you're trying to pick up on, things that are making the team unhappy, right? So, obviously you're hoping for some of that feedback. Is it the tight knitness of your team? You're just getting that feedback? Are you seeing that you have to maybe talk to different people to kind of piece together those puzzles?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say the feedback comes from all different people. If it's, if I'm working closely with another engineer on a certain project and I see opportunities for feedback, those pieces of feedback come directly from me. If, I'm having another meeting with a product person to kind of do a retrospective on how a certain project went, maybe the feedback comes from there. And I usually try, it just goes back to the notes, as certain pieces of feedback or opportunities for feedback come up, it's a matter of jotting it down, remembering that, the next one-on-one is in a couple days and I'm making a conscious effort to bring it up. in the one-on-one, as opposed to just randomly thinking of something, some piece of feedback, and it's half baked, 5 minutes beforehand. So I'd say if I had to give a percentage to it, maybe 50% of the feedback actually comes from me, and then 50% comes from different outside sources.
Awesome. I guess when it comes to remote, previously, I mean, we're a recruiting company. So one thing, obviously, we were aware of that people always are looking for jobs. And when we were all in the office, it's trickier for people to find creative ways to take interviews, be on site, that type of thing. And now with everyone working from home, obviously that's become a bit of a wild card, right? I mean, you can, you know, be on a Zoom for an interview and no one would really know. And it's probably a little bit blind spot, but I guess in terms of you and your team, how do you deal with that? Obviously, you're a smaller company. What are you looking to pick up on? Obviously, detecting people leaving or looking to leave is a very complex thing, anyways.
Yeah, definitely. It's the classic in the office recurring doctor's appointment. That's the way it used to come up. But I think it comes down to just like a level of trust between the manager and the employee. And trust goes both ways. I'm going to be open and transparent about, what the company direction is, like how I'm thinking about prioritizing certain projects, kind of, I guess, like top down transparency. And in return, I expect kind of the same level of trust and transparency. And so, it comes in the form of if you're unhappy, let's bring it up in our one on one. We'll put that in the not going well section. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about solutions to that. And, hopefully if something really isn't going well, we'll kind of, approach it and tackle it before it even becomes a larger issue to the point where they would want to leave. So I think, that's first and foremost. Let's try to, create the best experience. One of our core company values is mutual benefit. So is the company giving you the same amount of benefit that you're providing to the company in working for the company? So we try to keep that top of mind with all of our conversations. But, there's some things you can't control. Like one example that comes to mind is one of the engineers, wants more like hardware, more low level experience, and it wants to grow in that way. And we're kind of just, a web software, mobile app type. That's how the extent to which our product kind of expands. So it's tough to, give that engineer the opportunities in hardware and low level systems. And so, we started to brainstorm that, like, what do potential solutions to that look like? And we ended up connecting him with a couple outside people to get advice on, long term, what does that career path look like? And it ended up, we were open about it. It was open that he was potentially thinking about leaving. And, with that results, connecting him to people with a hardware background, he ended up actually realizing that he could get enough of that craving by doing hardware side projects and building his skill set there. At the same time, he wanted to kind of pursue leading a team and starting to manage people. And so that is something that fell within my wheelhouse, is something that we could start to do. And so we explored that. And so, yeah, I think just being open, if someone's unhappy and they want to work elsewhere, it's a lot better to kind of have the heads up, have a direct conversation about it, because then you're not surprising anyone. I think the last thing a manager wants is just like a straight 2 weeks notice. And then you have to kind of figure out how do you offboard someone within 2 weeks. And just keeping that open level of trust is really, really important.
Yeah, especially if somebody's been with you and they're ramped up and they're productive, that's a hard loss to kind of go through. And I guess the one thing you mentioned, building trust, and obviously it's, you mentioned on our pre-call, you guys have some pretty good tenure. People don't readily leave. People are there a couple of years. And now obviously you guys are onboarding people, growing the team through the pandemic. Are you seeing any differences, obviously, between that trust building process from when you were in the office and now what you're having to do to kind of build that similar level of trust to people you might never have met face to face?
Yeah, I think it's just a unique and new challenge, I would say. There's a lot of different trust building that happens in person versus remotely. I would say, it is a lot easier to do those types of things in person. I think there's, so much more to communication than just verbal. And so, it is a big shift. I'd say that becomes like a new challenge for onboarding someone remotely, is kind of building that trust. And for me and a lot of other people, trust is kind of built up slowly over time. And I think it kind of goes back to the same principles of it's a two-way street. If you're transparent top down, if you're transparent about the things you're working on, your priorities, how you're thinking about things, no one's going to have a perfect week every single week. And if I'm, as the manager, having a stressful week or, not having the best week, and on a personal level, I share that, top down. that channel, that roadway is going to continue to open, and they're going to feel a little bit more comfortable sharing the trust upwards as well. And so I'd say there's a couple like core principles of that two-way street that don't change whether it's in person or remote.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I guess now that, people are remote, actually just a side question just popped into my head. Your team mainly was built internal and now they're remote. Have you gotten any feedback that, people go, hey man, I miss being in the office? Cause I think the dream for everybody was, as a recruiter, is the role remote? Can I be remote? And now that every role is remote, I wonder if you're seeing some of the reverse of, man, I wish we could go back to the office. Does that come up at all for you?
At least like once a week. Yeah, it
Okay.
comes up a lot. No, it's maybe for the first like month or two, working remotely, it was kind of like a enjoyable experience. People could do their laundry in the afternoon while they were working, and it was great. And people started to feel a little bit more on top of like their own personal lives, I would say. And then now we're like getting to the point where yeah, we're craving that ability to be creative with each other. I feel like, remote is really good when you're tactically working on, executing a project or executing a vision and you have the space to think through that. You're not getting up interrupted by someone walking up to your desk. But, soon as you start to run out of things to execute on and the kind of like creative side, the brainstormy side, it's not as caught up as the things that you're executing on. You start to crave that kind of office experience. And so, yeah, it comes up a lot. I think we're actually, currently looking at new offices. And so, showing different pictures of potential offices to the engineers and the rest of the team is it's almost like something to look forward to. So it's been coming up a lot, actually.
Interesting. You mentioned obviously, going through the process of being remote, that creative process. Well, how have you found kind of a replacement for, obviously engineers love to be at a whiteboard, the ideation process. What are you kind of seeing as maybe a alternative, or are you guys finding an alternative to replace that ideation process?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, I think maybe everyone who has tried to go remotely and tried to replicate this experience has tried like, I don't know, all the different tools like Google Draw, or I found one called it like Excalidraw or something like that, where it's like a shared kind of collaborative space. And I think nothing of those sort really beats the kind of in-person brainstorming, whiteboarding experience. I do think like we found some other like creative tools that have actually really helped us out. So the one that might seem a bit unique is actually Discord, the kind of gaming chat room service where we actually leverage the voice channels a lot within Discord and create multiple different voice channels. And actually, I think Discord's latency is like pretty fast. So basically, when you're talking there without any video, it actually feels a lot more conversational and you can almost like interrupt people and like, brainstorm something with four people. And as opposed to the, Zoom or Google Hangouts or Google Meet latency, where oftentimes you have to like wait for someone to fully finish their thought before having that kind of awkward interruption. And so, we use Discord voice to brainstorm a lot. If we rapidly share a screen and kind of can draw something out pretty quickly, we're getting like 80 to 90% there of the whiteboard experience. I don't think anything currently available right now is going to hit 100%, but I would just suggest to be creative. And, just because a certain tool or piece of software is, was created for a certain industry doesn't mean it can't be used for today.
That's awesome, man. That's a great little gem. So I'm definitely somebody who's trying everything. Maybe they haven't looked at the voice channels on Discord as a helper to kind of replicate some of that ideation brainstorming you'd have in the office. I was going to say thanks for being on and sharing. I think it's been fantastic insight that you've had on the podcast.
Of course.
Absolutely. So if somebody wants to reach out to you and kind of pick up on anything you've mentioned on the podcast, is LinkedIn or Twitter, what's a good way to on social to get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely say reach out to me on LinkedIn. We're actually, at least for Shogun, we're entering a growth phase. So if you're in opportunities on the engineering front, love to have a conversation with you. Or as Amir said, of any of the topics, whether you resonate with them or not, I'd happy to have a discussion. So I'd say LinkedIn. And then I think Amir can also maybe include my work email as well. That also works.
Awesome, man. Thanks for being on. We'll add that all to the show notes. And that's it for this episode. We'll be back again with another guest, different set of topics. Until then, I always ask for two things. One, keep subscribing to the podcast. It's been just growing. I wish I could say we do a lot of marketing and the growth has been because of that, but it's actually been pure organic growth. And I have to thank you guys who are listening because I always am surprised when I look at the numbers and I see people are listening. And my wife's always like, you do realize that people are listening. I go, well, maybe I'll believe it in a year. The other thing that I really liked is I'm getting messages, at least a handful every week about topics. And I try to come up with topics, ideas. I have a list that I've emailed guests to help them come up with stuff. So if you have topics that you want me to talk to somebody about, please send those through because that's the other place where I could use some help. But until next time, have a great week. Thanks.